Hey guys, Defoffilizer here. Today I'm going to be talking about video game sequels. Basically, when it comes to sequels in video games, you can have some really good ones. Some that are so good that they sometimes even turn out better than the original. And then you have other sequels, some that had high expectations and ended up not meeting them, or some that just completely destroy what you loved about the first game. And I'm here to tackle both ends of the spectrum today. Same rules as always, one per franchise and only games I've played. However, there's one thing I think I should point out before we start. I'm well aware that Rabbids Luigi has recently made a list of his top 5 worst video game sequel. But here's the thing, I haven't played a whole lot of the really infamous ones like Duke Nukem Forever or Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts, so you won't find any entries from his list on mine. Now with all that said, let's get started with the list, starting with the worst ones, because I'd like to end the video on a good note.
Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts, but nuts and... Oh no! Oh no!
Here's evidence that a game doesn't necessarily have to be a bad game in order to be a bad sequel. Rabbids Travel in Time I actually did have some fun with. It was kind of neat going back in history, playing all the mini games in order to change history or keep it the same depending on what you want. Although I will admit it was a little weak in the minigame department just because there are a lot of minigames that repeat themselves. But even still, there are a lot of fun ones too. The real problem kicks in when you consider the utter masterpiece that Rabbids Go Home was. I mean, this game was so awesome and had a great adventure. It felt like a real letdown that the next game in the series just went back to minigames instead of doing this formula again, which I think was really good. I mean, could you imagine a Rabbids Go Home style game where you changed history like that? I think that would be awesome, but instead we just got another minigame collection, and even then it wasn't as good of a minigame collection as, say, Raving Rabbids 2. And yes, I know that the 3DS version of Rabbids Travel in Time was a 2D platformer, but it's just not the same as Rabbids Go Home. Overall, Rabbids Travel in Time was fun, but it was also pretty disappointing.
Oh no! No!
Epic Mickey Power of Illusion. Oh boy did they screw up with this one. Basically, this was an attempt to make an Epic Mickey spin-off to go alongside the release of Epic Mickey 2. However, there's a big problem with it, and that's the fact that it barely has anything to do with Epic Mickey. I mean, really the only two big ways this game relates back to the original Epic Mickey is that Oswald appears, granted he barely does anything in the game, but he is there, and you use the magic brush in combat. Okay, fine, you also use the magic brush on the field too. You use it to thin out certain things and paint them in, using a bit of a minigame approach as opposed to just regular painting it in or thinning it out of the original games. Oh, and there's a few small things such as the use of e-tickets for currency or the use of sketches in combat. And some music taken from the original Epic Mickey. I mean, for God's sake, Gus isn't even in this game. He had a bigger role in Epic Mickey than Oswald did. Instead, as your tutorial character, you have Jiminy Cricket. Now, Jiminy Cricket's not a bad character to be showing you the ropes. I mean, it worked in Kingdom Hearts. But when you have an already established character whose sole purpose is to be a tutorial character, maybe you should use him. Oh, and since this game understands completely what Epic Mickey's about, you go through all the iconic Disney worlds, because that's what Wasteland is, right? Filled with the iconic Disney ones. Okay, yeah, there's some story coincidence or whatever, but the thing is, that's not what Epic Mickey's about. It's not bringing back the iconic Disney stuff, it's about the stuff no one's heard of. I mean, if you wanted to do that, why did you have to make it an Epic Mickey game? But most of this entry's just been me complaining how little this game understands and links back to the Epic Mickey series. Now, how does it work as a standalone game? Well, it fails as well. Now, I will give it this. The soundtrack is pretty nice even if half of it's ripped from the original Epic Mickey, and the game started off pretty fun, not to mention the fortress was an interesting and clever gimmick. However, all that changes when you get midway through World 2 and find out how difficult this game can be. Now, before all of you say I'm complaining about a game being difficult, here's the thing. I don't hate difficult games, granted I prefer easier ones, but I'm still fine with difficult games. Games like Guacamelee, Super Meat Boy, and VVVVV were pretty difficult, but at the same time they were also really fun and it did feel like a fair challenge. Here though, it doesn't feel fair in the slightest. It feels incredibly cheap, which is something I don't like. This game was so frustrating that I eventually just rage quit. It admittedly was a unique concept, granted as little as it connected to the original Epic Mickey games, and I did want to like this game, but just how cheap it got pretty quickly just really turned me off to the whole experience. It's lower on the list though because it does have some redeeming qualities, and it did come out around the same time as Epic Mickey 2, I think like a month afterwards, so I can't fault it too much for being a bad sequel.
Oh no!
However, I can't forgive this game. This is LEGO City Undercover: The Chase Begins. For those who don't know, it was a prequel to LEGO City Undercover that came out not long after it did, so it technically counts as a sequel. The way I see it, this game is LEGO City Undercover minus everything that makes LEGO City Undercover awesome. Remember back in the overrated and underrated games list when I said that the handheld version of a game is almost always inferior to the home console version of it? Well, this is one of the biggest examples. Okay, let's start with the hardware limitations. Now, this one I can't necessarily fault the game for, as the 3DS doesn't have the same processing power as the Wii U, so the city split up into segments and you have to go through a loading screen each time to get between them. Not to mention, there's low draws distance with some of the characters. I know it's not the game's fault, but that still really bugs me. One of the biggest things that bugs me about The Chase Begins is the voice acting. You see, in LEGO City Undercover, everything was voice acted. Here, outside of the cutscenes, there is no voice acting, it's all text. I guess they just couldn't get the voice actors from the original game to come here. I can sort of understand. I mean, I doubt they'd really want to come to voice in the version of LEGO City that they knew no one was going to buy. However, the fact they couldn't get enough voice actors is still pretty embarrassing, considering the fact that the original game, they got both Morgan Freeman and Arnold Schwarzenegger, or at least two people who sound identical to them. The humor was the best part about the original LEGO City, but the lack of voice acting here kinda takes a lot of it out. Admittedly, they did get voice acting in the cutscenes, and most of these cutscenes are almost on par with the original LEGO City Undercover. However, these cutscenes are few and very far between. The story in this game, which was the other key point about the original LEGO City Undercover, is boring. The most that happens that I remember is that 5 of LEGO City's most dangerous criminals escape from Albatross Prison. However, aside from Rex Fury, I can't remember any of them, because the game never made them memorable enough. And not being able to pay attention to the story is a real problem when you consider how many times the events of this game are referenced in LEGO City Undercover. Oh, and the missions in this game are horrible as well. Remember that horrible chapter in the original LEGO City Undercover, Bringing Home the Bacon, where you were first to work on a farm? Imagine if every mission in the game was like that, and you've got The Chase Begins. I kid you not, the first mission of the game is getting donuts for Dunby. Okay, that might be a bit of an exaggeration, but the story and missions in this game are still really uninteresting. But all this have been about the story and humor. How's the gameplay hold up? Well, they actually made the gameplay in this game worse too. Really, everything in this game just feels like a chore. Anything from cracking vaults to prying open doors takes a lot longer in this game than it did in LEGO City Undercover, which really just makes it feel annoying. I get that this game's missions get better later on, but it still just feels devoid and not very fun, and is not a game I would recommend in the slightest. At least with Power of Illusion, they tried to make something fun. This, they took an already existing game and just sucked all the life out of it. There's a reason I gave a synopsis of what happened in this game in my Let's Play of LEGO City Undercover, because of the fact that I didn't want anyone to have to suffer through this game in order to know what happened.
Oh no!
Now, so far the games on this worst sequels list have been sequels to games that I've already said on this channel I love. Rabbids Go Home, Epic Mickey, LEGO City Undercover. However, this is a sequel to a game that I've never mentioned loving before, but I really do. Plants vs. Zombies. I really like the original Plants vs. Zombies, but the sequel, boy was it a letdown. Maybe I'm just nostalgically biased or whatever, but none of the new plants in this game really interested me all that much. I mean, sure, the bloomerangs were pretty useful, and the peas in a pod thing was kinda nice, but other than that, I didn't really find anything stand out all that much. Same with the stage gimmicks. I really liked the stage gimmicks in the first game, however, here they just felt overcomplicated and kind of annoying. Except for the Wild West, I'll fully admit that gimmick was nice. And maybe some other stage gimmicks too. I don't know, I haven't played the game past that update because I kind of lost interest. Oh, and as for the new gimmicks, I wasn't too fond of them either. Basically, the plant food and superpower gimmicks, in the original game, it would have felt like cheating. However, here you practically need to do it to win because the zombies are a lot harder in this game. They also made the controls worse in this game. Here, let me explain. The way the graphics are set up in this game, everything's smaller, so the grid is smaller, so you sometimes place a plant where you don't want it. This wouldn't be much of a problem, except for the fact that it barely happened in the original game, but it happened a lot more to me here. But the biggest crime in this whole game is his shop. In the original game, his shop was full of various different items that you could buy for in-game cash. They were never too expensive, so you could always afford them from the money that you got from beating the zombies. In the second game, however, it's the same thing, only you have to pay real money. And the thing is, these prices are freaking outrageous. $3 for one plant? Are you kidding me? Oh, and the world map. While I can't harp on it too much since they fixed it in an update, it would prevent you from exiting the world and going on to the next one until you've completed a bunch of ludicrous challenges in the levels. And there were one of two options, either do all these ridiculous challenges or pay to get through. Now, this might seem reasonable, but they make it so hard and so tedious to complete these challenges that there's pretty much no choice. Oh, and there are these alternate paths that you can get keys to unlock certain upgrades. However, those keys you can barely ever find, so the only way to typically get through is to pay for it. Now this actually makes sense, because while the original was pretty much an indie project, this one is sponsored by EA. You know, the guys who will take every single opportunity they have to pinch every single penny in your wallet. The way I see it, the original Plants vs. Zombies was the perfect example of how to make a mobile game. Plants vs. Zombies 2, on the other hand, is the perfect example of how not to make a mobile game.
Oh, no! No!
Paper Mario Sticker Star. Yeah, big surprise here. Anyone here who's familiar with my channel knows that I am not a big fan of this game. I can't so much as bring up the Paper Mario series without bad-mouthing this one. I hate it so much. But before I get into the many ways that this game screwed up the Paper Mario series, how about we go over the few, and I mean few, positives of this game. One thing that I really do have to say about this is that above any of the Paper Mario games, it does the paper gimmick the best. I will not deny that. It does the paper gimmick amazingly. Also, the soundtrack, while not as good as the other Paper Mario games, is still pretty good and some nice music to listen to overall. Okay, now we're on to the negatives. First thing I think I should mention is that some would consider this game a Mario RPG, and well, it does fall into the Paper Mario series, but the thing is, this game's not an RPG. Super Paper Mario was more of an RPG than this game, because in that game, at least you leveled up by battling, even if it wasn't in a turn-based style. Here you have turn-based battles, but you actually don't get anything for leveling up, except for coins, which you use to buy stickers, which you use to perform attacks, so it really just goes in an infinite loop. You know, who could forget about the partners? That was one of the things that made the game so memorable. Clearly the developers, because you don't have any party members in this game. Instead, all you have is Kirsty, who really isn't all that entertaining of a character. I get that in Super Paper Mario your partners were pretty bland too, but it's kind of made up for the fact that you have Mario, Peach, Luigi, and Bowser as opposed to just Mario. Oh, and don't even get me started of the abomination of a story in this game. You see, in the first 3 games, it was always something unique, you know? Heck, even in the original one, sure, it was just Bowser kidnapping Peach, but there was more on the line. He also stole all the star spirits who were granting people's wishes and granting his own, and trapped them in cards. Here, it's just him kidnapping Peach. That's it. Oh, and he unleashes these magical sticker things. Also, I find it incredibly stupid that I'm supposed to care about the fate of these 8 royal stickers, where literally the only thing we know about them is that they are powerful. Now, some people might say that's because the theme of the game is stickers, but that still doesn't justify it. Mario & Luigi Dream Team, the whole theme was sleep and dreaming. The ancient people are called pillows. However, the thing about them is that it actually gives a fleshed out and in-depth backstory about the history of them, how Phantasma screwed everything up, and the significance of the Dream Stone and Nightmare Stone. And before you guys say that Miyamoto himself said that Paper Mario didn't need a story, just because someone's a genius doesn't mean everything they say is smart. I mean, Miyamoto's done a lot of great things, but keep in mind he also created the Water Temple and authorized the Super Mario Bros. Movie. That's no insult to him, he's done a lot of great things, I'm just saying he can make mistakes. Oh, and here's probably my biggest issue with this whole game, yeah, even more than the story, it's the lack of direction. This game is incredibly easy to get lost in despite how linear it looks. The bosses in this game are complete jokes too. All they are giant versions of regular enemies, and there's a horrible mechanic they add to the battle that I never even realized because I rage quit before I got to that point because of the lack of the direction. Basically, when I know how the fights in this game work, the boss is impossible to defeat unless you have a specific sticker. If you have said sticker, you use it and beat the boss instantly. Oh, I don't think there's some clever way of figuring it out either. No. The way to know how to beat the boss is by looking it up online. There is pretty much no indication as to which stickers the boss is weak against. Now, some might argue that this isn't a bad game, but rather a bad sequel. And you know, maybe if you can separate it from the rest of the Paper Mario series, you can see it that way. But to me, it's not just a bad sequel, it's the worst video game sequel, as indicated by it being number 1 on the list. Okay, now that we've gotten all the bad sequels out of the way, it's time to move on to the good ones. If you're familiar with my channel, you would know that Mario & Luigi Partners in Time, while a good game, is my least favorite game in the Mario & Luigi series. You would also know that Bowser's Inside Story is my favorite game in the Mario & Luigi series. So yeah, you can pretty much tell where this is going. Mario & Luigi Bowser's Inside Story is the first game in the Mario & Luigi series that I played, and it still holds up as my favorite one in the series. It took out all the awkward design choices that were in Mario & Luigi Partners in Time and added a bunch of good new stuff. One thing it added was it upgraded Fawful to the status of main villain, and while he's no longer my favorite Mario villain, he's still my favorite villain in the Mario & Luigi series. Not to mention the soundtrack of this game is simply amazing. It's way better than Partners in Times, and even then Partners in Times was decently good. By far the biggest addition to the game is Bowser. Bowser, for the first time playable in the Mario & Luigi series, is very enjoyable. He's a very fun character to play as, he has a very entertaining personality in this game, and heck, the Mario & Luigi, a lot of their segments take place inside of him, doing a bunch of things to help stimulate his muscles, or clear his nasal passages, or whatever to help him on his adventure. Not to mention the new and very creative giant battles, while few in number, were always a lot of fun whenever they showed up. And even then, the game still knows when to go back to Mario & Luigi, and it knows how to balance them very well. Overall, this is one of my favorite games out there, and definitely my favorite Mario & Luigi game. If you're planning on picking up any Mario & Luigi games, I recommend this one first. You can obviously play the others if you want, but I honestly think that this is the best out of all of them. Right up there with Mario, Pikmin has gotta be one of my favorite video game series of all time. I mean, all the different types of Pikmin, all the strategies you can use, the characters, the environments, everything about this series is just really good. However, probably the best part about this series is how much innovation each new title brings. However, I couldn't decide which one I liked more, so I ended up deciding to put both Pikmin 2 and 3 on here. I'll start with Pikmin 2 since it obviously came first. Some of the things this did for the series was it introduced a second character so that you can control Pikmin from multiple points, as well as introducing 2 new types of Pikmin. It also gave more to do by both sizing up the above ground locations and also getting rid of the 30-day time limit. You still have 13 minutes each day, but you have as many days as you want. Not to mention the Piklopedia and treasure entries were pretty fun. However, by far the most important addition in this game were the caves. They only lasted for this game, but the caves provided a lot of extra game time. Basically, you would have no time limit in these and just tried to grab all the fruits on each floor while defeating the enemies and trying to keep your Pikmin supply from dwindling. It made for a lot of new enemies, improved the atmosphere of the game, and one of the most interesting things of all the treasures you collect are actually real-world items, like cans of Coke. Actually, I'm not sure that was a specific one, but it's pretty much stuff like that. Pikmin 3, on the other hand, went in a bit of a different direction, but it's one I can appreciate just as much. It got rid of the caves, but to be honest, I don't mind that. While they were a lot of fun in Pikmin 2, it does work better with this particular game that they don't have the caves in. Besides, it's not like I especially wanted them in more than one game. That's because this game went more for Pikmin's real-time strategy aspect, which is something I can appreciate just as much. It introduced some new elements, like while getting rid of whites and purples, they did introduce 2 new types of Pikmin, as well as a third captain, and made the above-ground areas even bigger. Oh, and the graphics in this game. Those of you who still think the Wii U isn't HD, feast your eyes on this game. And you haven't even heard my 2 favorite things that got introduced in this game yet. The first one is the Go Here function, where basically you can use the map on the gamepad to send one captain over to a specific place, and then they'll automatically go there while you can play as another one collecting fruit. My other favorite addition is the dialogue. You see, in the past 2 Pikmin games, the only way you really got to know your characters was in Pikmin 1 you would see Olimar's entries in his ship's log, and in Pikmin 2 you would see his Piclopedia entries as well as Louie's Piclopedia entries. Here though, the characters actually have dialogue with each other. It really gives the characters a lot more personality. Also, one thing I should mention in this game is that the day system is kind of a compromise between the two. On one hand, you're not limited to 30 days, but at the second time you do need to keep moving and can't just dawdle around, fixing the problems of both systems. Overall, the Pikmin games really tend to innovate whenever they get a new installment, and I can't wait for Pikmin 4, even if it takes like 10 years to make. Okay, Infamous 2. You guys probably saw this one coming from my Infamous 2 vs. Infamous Second Son, but yeah, I really like Infamous 2, and quite a margin better than the original Infamous. Now, why do I like Infamous 2 better? Well, one thing I do have to say is I didn't end up playing through the original Infamous. That's because I feel it got too hard pretty early on. But yeah, I got stuck pretty early on in Infamous 1, but in Infamous 2, the difficulty feels pretty balanced. Almost all the challenges you come up against feel fair, and with a little thinking you can pull it off. There was one really annoying mission, but other than that, the gameplay was really fair. The game's also a really good sequel in terms of story perspective. Not just how good the story is, like I mentioned in my Infamous 2 vs. Infamous Second Son vs. rant, but also the way it connects to the original. At the beginning of the game, they explain everything that happened in Infamous 1 that you need to know in this game without actually spoiling a whole lot. Granted, there are some plot points that they spoil, but they don't spoil any of the major ones, particularly the big plot twist at the end. Another thing that this game introduced that I couldn't find footage of but it's really good is the amp. The amp is an incredibly fun weapon to use. It's great for up-close melee combat and it's so satisfying, especially when it lets you pull off combos. Also, one thing I brought up in that recent video that I feel I need to bring up again is the karma system in this game. In this game, a lot of the decisions aren't really that cut or dry. Sometimes the good option can be risky, as opposed to the original game. In the original game, where for the most part, your decision boiled down to do something that'll slightly impede yourself, or something that will greatly hinder a ton of people. I also like the story in the second one better because the first one, it was mainly just coping with how much everyone hates him, while in the second game, it's more so focusing on how you're going to complete the goal of defeating the beast. Oh, and not to mention New Marais just feels like a more colorful and fun city as opposed to Empire City, which kind of felt depressing. Overall, Infamous 1 was an okay game, but Infamous 2 is a lot better. Now, I played the original Portal, and you know, I thought it was actually pretty fun. I had a good time with it. However, when I was playing it, I just didn't really feel like it was the ultimate classic that so many gamers were hailing it as. But then again, that's probably because I played Portal 2 first. Portal 2 goes by a simple yet effective mantra for its sequel: add more of everything. And while that mentality didn't really work well with Plants vs. Zombies 2, it works wonders here. Now let's start with the elephant in the room here. Portal 2 is way longer than the original, but then again that's kind of obvious because of how much new content they put in. They added some new characters too. They added Wheatley, the bumbling yet charming idiot, along with the crazy, passionate science enthusiast Cave Johnson. Not to mention, GLaDOS is back and better than ever in this game. Another thing they added was some new areas. You see, in the original game it was just sort of sterilized labs, however here they show a bunch of different things, such as the areas of Aperture that have been overrun with vegetation, to the labs that still look somewhat professional but you can tell aren't in the best shape of their lives, to going to areas you're not supposed to be, like say the turret manufacturing area, and of course going into old Aperture deep underground and seeing what Aperture labs used to be like before you came along. The game also knew what it was doing with the puzzle elements. It added some really cool new ones like the gels and lasers, while eliminating the ones from the original that didn't work, like the energy balls. Seriously, am I the only one who hated those? One of the big reasons Portal 2 gets so high is that its tactic is essentially improve everything, and that's what they do. The reason it's not number 1 is because these guys were actually improving on an already fun game, which obviously is no bad thing, but number 1 didn't have that advantage. Allow me to tell you guys a story about my experiences with a little game series called Kingdom Hearts. I saw a lot of stuff about Kingdom Hearts 2 on the internet and I thought it looked like an awesome game, so I decided to check it out. Since the final mixed versions of both games were being released in America, I thought I would get started on the series with the original game and then move on to Kingdom Hearts 2. However, what I was greeted with was a decently good story. However, I was also greeted with fairly basic combat that wasn't really very fun, a bunch of worlds that felt lacking in depth, and worst of all, some of the most unfair and frustrating bosses I've ever faced in a video game. But I held out till Kingdom Hearts 2 because I remembered that was the game I got really excited for by watching the videos of it, not this one. And what I ended up playing was exactly the game I was hoping for. The story in this game, while it was good in the first one, is even better here. Sure, it was pretty complicated, but most of it ended up making sense towards the end. And sure, there were a few things that you needed to have played the other games to understand, which was kind of annoying, but for the most part it wasn't a big problem. The levels in this game were also really good too. They all had some unique things to each other that really made them feel like their own. There's also a lot more story to these levels, as most of them you end up going back to in the game. But it's not like it's the same thing over and over again, it's different things you're doing, just in the same location. The combat in this game is also a lot more fluid and fun. You can get a lot of good combos, and there are some really nice additions to it, such as the drive gauge, and of course the reaction commands. This game also fixed two really big problems that the original had. One is not being able to skip cutscenes, and the other was not being able to interact with objects during combat. These two things may seem very minor, but trust me, they are a lot more frustrating than you would think. But probably this game's biggest improvement is the bosses in this game. You see, in the original game, most of the bosses were just really brutally difficult and unfair, with the occasional fun one in the mix. Here, it's the exact opposite. I'm Defoffalizer, and while I wasn't the biggest fan of the original Kingdom Hearts, I am very glad it existed, because if it didn't, then this game wouldn't be here, and I really like Kingdom Hearts 2.